There's the pass to Leitner. Puts it up. Yes!
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Cameron Chronicles. I'm your host, Ranjan Jindal, joined by my co-host, Caleb Dudley. Caleb, good morning. How are you, man?
I'm good. It's coming down to that time of year.
It is. It's been a minute since we've had a podcast, but we're recording right now. Today is Friday, one day ahead of Duke's second contest against UNC. Today, we're actually going to be joined by 3 Daily Tar Heel riders. It's going to be super exciting. We'll have them on in a few minutes to preview that contest. And then later in the show, we're going to end it with a ACC Tournament preview because Duke is going to be playing in Charlotte next week. The last regular season game is tomorrow against North Carolina, so we'll talk about that, give you some picks, maybe some sleepers, and then also talk about our ACC Players of the Year and final awards predictions and stuff like that. So it should be super fun. I'm excited for this episode. But first, this episode is brought to you by Duke Stores. Support your favorite Duke team. Duke Stores is home to the only collection of merchandise in the world that comes to you straight from Duke University. Go to shop.duke.edu for all of your Duke merch. So the last time we had a podcast was previewing the Illinois matchup in Madison Square Garden, which feels like such a long time ago, but I was over there in MSG and, my God, handing Illinois the worst loss in program history. Duke was connecting on all cylinders offensively, and it was just astronomical blowout. And since then, Duke has won 3 more contests against Florida State, Miami, and Wake, all by pretty comfortable margins as well. So just kind of taking those 4 games as a whole, and you can talk about specific examples that you've seen from any of those. What have been your takeaways from this Duke team, and what stood out to you from those performances?
Yeah, I think the first thing is the offense is just clicking on all cylinders at this point. Start of the year, Duke was missing some open looks. And the defense was pretty far ahead of the offense. I think you could argue the offense is better than the defense at this point in the season. Illinois game in particular, my God. Everyone was firing. It's been really, really good. Even when Tyrese Proctor went out against Miami and missed the Florida State game,
right?
Isaiah Evans has stepped in perfectly. He's one of the best shooters in the conference. And so just the way they've been playing team offense is really impressive to watch. And everyone's very selfless. They move the ball really well, and so just to see them kind of unlock that, I don't know, maybe what it was, but just slowly building to this point where they're really an offensive juggernaut at this point. To already go with their great defense they have.
Yeah, what they've been doing, especially on shooting the 3 ball, it's just the percentages have been great. And I think it's a couple things. One is, even when you bring in a bunch of new players and a bunch of new transfers, it takes a minute for everyone to gel.
Right.
And I think even in the first semester, I would say, the defense, they had the effort there, but effort isn't enough on offense. And, effort is usually enough on defense. You have to have communication as well, but there's so much of that's necessary on offense. And now you see that from this team. After the Illinois game, I wrote my sidebar on Sion James, who I think is going to be tremendously important because Sion James I went through some little stats in that article, but he's quietly shooting, 42.6% from 3. And he's often that player on the weak side when teams double Cooper or teams double or off a pick and roll. Sion James is usually on that opposite wing waiting for a 3. And if he can knock him down at 42%, teams are going to have to pick their poison. If their poison is a wide open Sion James jumper, that's not a good recipe for success against this team. And he also is just tremendous in assist to turnover ratio. That's one thing that I mentioned. He's one of the top in the league in that figure. And so he just brings another dimension to this offense. Con Knippel's been playing really well recently. And, you said about Isaiah, but man, he's putting it up. And I love his confidence right now. He never seems to lose that. And even though he takes some questionable shots at times, I think the trade-off is he knows he has a green light and Shire doesn't seem to mind most of the time, which when you're shooting that well, I think that's okay.
Yeah, you see him. I think it's evident once he sees one go in, it's on. Especially in MSG, that game in MSG. He saw that first one go in, and he was clapping his hands. He was ready. And so I think, he's a 6th, 7th man, however you want to call it. And when he comes in, he knows, kind of his task, and that's to play defense and shoot the 3. And he's done it really well. So credit to Isaiah. He's really worked his way into a good spot. Back to Sion, like you said. Is there a better portal ad this season than? He fits this team perfectly. I think especially for Proctor to have him be able to play off the ball the way Proctor's been scoring this season, to have someone who can bring it up the floor and that doesn't turn the ball over and can distribute and run the offense is really impressive. And then Khan, yeah, I mean, it seems like every game he's more comfortable. He breaks out some new post move we've never seen down there.
Yeah, his footwork's tremendous.
He's so good at drawing fouls to get to the line. He's excellent free throw shooter. And so I mean, yeah, and then I guess you go to Kaman as the last starter we haven't talked about. I mean, he's really been stepping it up. Wake Forest, the first game we played against Wake Forest, wasn't great on the glass. He had 14 rebounds, 6 offensive rebounds in the last game against Wake Forest. So he's really coming on and developing too, as another young guy. So things are really coming together at the right time.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that a little bit because I know you covered the first Wake Forest game and then the second game. At the beginning, it seemed to be like it might be a similar pattern of a low-scoring affair where Duke would have to really grind one out because Wake did a really good job cutting off driving lanes and playing collective defense, and Duke turned it on in the second half, scoring 53 points. I mean, Duke even had 40 at halftime, which the second 10 minutes of the first half, the Blue Devils played a lot better. I'll ask you first, and I have a couple answers on this too from my perspective, but what do you think were some of the biggest differences between those two contests and Duke winning by, 6, I think, versus 33?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just mentioned the first one is Kaman.
Yeah.
I mean, that first game, Efton Reed got him in foul trouble early, and it was really tough for him to, stay on the floor, and Efton was killing him on the glass too. And so, I mean, he was 2 for 7 on offense, which is probably his worst shooting night of the season, but still had 14 rebounds. And, obviously the way he affects the ball down low on defense is really impressive. So for him to do that and keep them off the glass is, I mean, really good. 45 rebounds for Duke, 33 for Wake Forest, a big difference from the last game. And so, I mean, yeah, that was the big one. I think holding Cameron Hildreth and Hunter Salas to 3 for 17 combined is, really good.
Scoreless for Hildreth too, right?
Yeah, he 0 for 7, 0 points. And so, yeah, and then the last thing there is, I mean, Cooper Flagg just turned it on. I mean, you saw him, he's looking at his hand, like, I mean, he got everything he wanted. He was hitting dirt, one-legged fades. I mean, he get whenever he wants. And so when he does that, I mean, it's hard for any team just to beat Duke. And I think, as the season's gone on, I think the start of the season, Duke had some stretches in the first half of games where they would kind of go cold right at the end of the half and struggle. And even you saw the start of the games, like Auburn punched them in the mouth right at the beginning of the game, was like 12-0 or whatever it was.
Yeah, it's like 16-3.
Yeah.
At one point.
And so now, I mean, it seems like Duke is so immune to those things. No one's going to impose their will on Duke, especially not at Cameron. And so Wake tried to turn it into like a little bit of a wrestling match at the start of the game, and I think Duke just eventually just wore them out and cruised to a win.
Yeah, I agree. Second chance points was one differential. Our Mackenzie Sheehy, one of our writers, did a tremendous job writing about the differences there. She mentioned second chance points. Fast break scoring was big too, getting out an offense because Wake Forest half court defense is so good. So if you, use your defense to create offense quickly and early, that helps. And then the last thing was turnover difference because in the first game, Cooper Flagg and Kahn had, I think, 12 combined turnovers maybe. And this game, although Duke still had 10 turnovers, which, is still pretty good, all things considered. Points off turnovers was really big. Duke was able to capitalize on Wake turnovers and still, hold its own on its own turnovers, meaning that didn't really let Wake score off of it very much. Duke scored 14 threes again, and that's just become another dimension of this offense that we've talked about. So when you can do all that and still take care of the ball, it really makes it a tough out. So impressive performance from the Blue Devils there at home to close out the slate.
And I do think, too, like going off the fast break stuff, Duke doesn't really like push the pace anything crazy on offense, but they are really good. They pick their times really well.
Right.
And I mean, yeah, like they get. I mean, Duke gets a ton of stops, obviously, and so it has a good sense for when to get out and run. They have some guys that are pretty dangerous on the fast break. Cooper Flagg being one of them. And like even Mile Watch runs the floor really really well for a big man. And so I think you're definitely right. And fast break points are really important, especially in these close games, to kind of wear the other team out. So, yeah.
There's one, I think it was Wake, where Cooper he'd grabbed a crazy steal and then took 2
The
steps.
one arm,
Half court. Maybe that was Florida State, but I think it was Wake. Yeah, that was wild. One last thing that I'll say about the Wake game that impressed me was Gillis. He had a few threes and got on the glass well. I think Malik Brown's injury has been, obviously not good, but it's been good for Gillis to really step into his own and find his role. I mean, if he's going to shoot the ball like he did at Purdue in that tournament run, that'll be really big for Duke to provide another 3-and-D threat. He had 11-2 against Wake, 9-5 against Florida State. So the last 2 games have been good for Mason, and his confidence, you can see, is starting to grow from a somewhat rough start to start the year.
Yeah, I mean, even to that, I think same thing with Patrick
Yeah.
Gongbo. I mean, he had 6 rebounds, 3 offensive against Wake. I mean, just for him to kind of get some minutes, even if when Malik comes back, he's not going to play as much. For him to develop for next year for Duke as well, assuming he stays. Nowadays, you never know, but for him to just kind of get that development, and when he gets out there, it's not like a big drop off. It's huge for Coach Shire. And then I mean, everyone's really has been playing well. I mean, even Hubbard's been getting in there and hit a 3 at MSG to get to 100. Yeah, I mean, everything's looking pretty good.
Yeah, Stanley Borden and Spencer Hubbard playing in MSG. That was quite fun.
Yep.
All right, good stuff. So, yeah, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, like I mentioned, we'll be joined by 3 Daily Tar Heel writers. We'll introduce them to preview the UNC game when we come back right after this. All right, welcome back to the Cameron Chronicles. Like I mentioned earlier, we'll be joined by 3 very special guests, all from the Daily Tar Heel to preview the game tomorrow. We're joined by Caroline Wills, who's the sports editor of the Daily Tar Heel, and 2 assistant sports editors, Emma Moon and Matthew Maynard. Thank you guys for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, this will be super fun. Just to start out, obviously there's been a lot of change for this North Carolina team since the last time the two played. For those who don't remember, it was an 87-70 win for Duke and Cameron Indoor on February 1st. That score really doesn't tell the whole story of what happened that game. But since then, North Carolina has won, is that 7 out of 8, including 6 in a row. Caroline, I'll start with you, and then the rest can follow. What do you think have been some of the biggest differences between that team and then the team that we're going to see tomorrow in Chapel Hill?
Well, I think first, UNC has finally kind of solidified a starting lineup that is working a lot better and that has a little bit more size. So having both Drake Powell, Jalen Withers, Van Allen Lubin, it just really is giving them a much needed boost. They're rebounding better, they're shooting in the paint better, and overall the chemistry just looks better, which can sound a little cliche for people who aren't like paying attention closely to what's happening on the court. But I mean, players are just a little bit more connected. They're passing better, they're logging more assists, they're just being more aggressive overall. So I think this is definitely a team that is trending upwards, and especially a lot of the big men are starting to find a little bit more of their groove, which is definitely necessary for playing a team like Duke.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. I also think like their 3-point shooting is just so much better. This is crazy, but UNC has been the second hottest 3-point shooting team in the nation across the last 6 games, which I know that their competition hasn't been up to par. They're kind of facing some of the weakest teams in the ACC, so of course there's that. But they're just shooting better as a whole, and suddenly Jalen Withers is Steph Curry. I don't know. We're still trying to figure out how that happened. We have no clue.
Put that on a shirt.
Yeah, exactly.
But they've knocked down 35 3-pointers, and then this is shocking, but RJ Davis has also recorded, I think, 3 threes across the last 3 games, which is the first time this season that he's had a trio of threes in 3 straight games, which is insane when you think about it being RJ Davis. So they're shooting better from 3, which I think is, if you're going to have such a small lineup and a guard heavy lineup, which obviously they switched to more bigs, but whenever you of course have more guards, you need to knock down those shots, and that's something that they struggled with terribly earlier in the season. So I think that's a big shift for them.
Yeah, I think both Emma and Caroline really hit the nail on the head here with kind of this team and the trajectory that it's been on. But I'd also say that offensively, they've looked a lot more connected, and they've looked like they're having a lot more fun than they had in the beginning of the year. Defensively, it's kind of lagging. I know offensively, they're top 25 in the country over the past 6 games, but defensively has kind of struggled a bit. But I do think the kind of role that Jalen Withers has found himself in and the comfort of the offense as a whole has led to this run. And I know, Emma, you wrote about it a couple of games ago, but that this team is starting to do more things off the court, which is something that they should have been doing in the preseason. So the fact that it took them until, I guess, late February, early March to find this chemistry is kind of concerning, but it's also, it's happening at the right time.
Interesting. Emma, can you talk a little bit more about that? What specific things are they doing off the court? Oh, she might be frozen. Oh, there we go. She's back.
Sorry,
Yeah.
no, it did cut out for a second.
I was just saying, could you talk a little bit more about that? Yeah, that piece.
No, what the craziest part, and Matthew, Caroline, and I all kind of talked about this because it was insane, but Van Allen Lubin basically told me that the team has made an effort to just go up and say hi to each other. Like, this is one example, but just say hi to each other whenever they see each other on campus. And I'm like, wouldn't you think you do that in June? Like whenever you come for summer workouts, like wouldn't you think you'd start doing that? So they've taken time in the locker room to kind of spend more time together. They started joking in the locker room, and it was really an effort that started after they lost horribly to Clemson. I think that was like Duke was a bad loss, but Clemson was just like the lowest of the low for them. So they all just kind of they didn't say who exactly started it, but they genuinely just made an effort to become not necessarily friends, I guess, but just like friendly, like that they could just be a squad, which is so crazy to me because it's like that's I feel like the most basic principle of like having a good team is that you have good chemistry. And I think the reason this team, a lot of people are hype in Chapel Hill that they've gone on this 6-game winning streak, but it's like the fact that they discovered that in mid-February after losing so badly to Clemson is a really bad sign, and something that I feel like you should have established as soon as you started working out in the summer. But I'm not Hubert Davis, so
No, I'm glad you mentioned that because I feel like a lot of people talk about chemistry and almost take it for granted with basketball teams that teams do have that. But something just as little as saying hi or cracking jokes, that's interesting that you say that because maybe sometimes that's all it takes. I'm curious about you guys have all mentioned the big men playing better. Is it more of what you're seeing is like a confidence building thing or maybe they're just playing against worse competition? Or is there something different about their games or the scheme offensively that you think has led to these big men just playing better? Because, the start of the year, there was a lot of struggles, particularly with, Van Allen Lubin and Jalen Washington at times. What have you seen from them recently?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all three.
Mm.
I know that when Matthew and I went to Hubert Davis's press conference yesterday, and there were some jokes about how at the beginning of the year, Van Allen Lubin could not catch the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that is because of the way that Elliot Cadeau passes, and you just have to be ready at all times, and it could come from any direction at any moment, and you might think you're not open, but suddenly it's there in your hands. So it's a combination of that. He's apparently gotten more used to passes like that, and there was some practice recently where he caught a crazy pass and laid it in and he ran back down. And Hubert was like, are you starting to figure this out? Are you starting to catch Elliot's passes? And he just goes, yep. And
That's
I
cool.
think that's very indicative of part of Lubin's success
Yeah.
is he's catching the ball better now. But he's also just playing with a little bit more of a softer touch, playing more aggressively. And part of that is because of the caliber of opponent they're playing. A lot of teams have been kind of mismatching, and so the bigs have been exploiting that. Anytime there's a smaller guard on them, I mean, they're just taking it to the rim, laying it in super easy, rolling off of screens, getting open, all of that. So I think there's been some offensive changes because of the opponents they're playing. It's not probably going to work against Duke. There's not going to be that mismatch opportunity. But there is something to say about Lubin playing a little bit better, playing more aggressively, catching the ball, expecting the ball better. And then we mentioned this earlier, but Jalen Withers has now become the team's self-proclaimed savior, it appears. He's got an unbelievable three-point shot right now. His statistics are kind of crazy. And RJ Davis was joking that what they need for him at Duke is just to shoot more threes. So I think that's very indicative of where they're at with him. And somebody asked RJ what's been the change for Jalen, and his answer was his Jalen's Twitter account.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Great,
I
great,
love it.
great Twitter account. It's great.
For those of you that don't know, I believe we've cracked the case that Jalen's Twitter was posting all of these like really cheesy tweets, just like people were like, "This is not him."
All right.
Armando Aycott's tweeting out like, "Who is running this Twitter account? This is not Jalen Withers." Come to find out, it's Jalen's dad, and it's continued to kind of tweet and
So
blow up,
good.
and people are kind of attributing that to this positive trend for him.
That's so funny. Look at that. We cracked the case here. Good reporting, guys. Uh,
Yeah.
what about you?
The last guy you just kind of didn't mention there is Drake Powell. Obviously had a big game against Duke in the second half there when North Carolina went on a little bit of a run. What have you seen from him since he got in the starting lineup? How does he raise North Carolina's ceiling? And what has he been doing really well recently?
Yeah, I mean, he just brings unbelievable length and defensive intensity. I mean, he has really figured out his identity on defense, and it's kind of really cool to watch like a freshman have that kind of arc of figuring out their place and being a consistent appearance in the starting lineup. He's also just shooting more consistently. He's getting better looks, and part of that is because he's playing more at the three instead of at the four. So he's getting a little bit more shots at the wing, which is definitely his strong suit.
Yeah, I completely agree with that too. I also think that like one thing, and Caroline mentioned this, but he's just so versatile. And Hubert will always have this quote where he's like, "I'm a positionless coach," but I think specifically with Drake Powell, he can move around a lot of places and be beneficial in a lot of areas where I think other players on UNC's team kind of lack that versatility. So I think Drake Powell feels unique in a lot of ways that other players aren't. And obviously you could see that with just like he might be the only player to get drafted. But yeah, so
I agree. I think a lot of it is the switch to the three, and I know, we allude to the fact that Hubert doesn't think that there's positions, but he did bring it up yesterday at his press conference that, him switching to playing, smaller forwards in the sense that, he's not matching up with a 6'8", 6'10" forward every single game, whether that be on the offensive end or defensive end, has allowed him to kind of make this leap. Um, and I know Drake's only listed at 6'6", but athletically, he plays probably like he's 6'8", maybe a little bit more than that. So he has the athletic ability and the defensive mindset to match up with anybody. But I think moving him into his more natural position, where he played in high school, has been the biggest benefactor in this North Carolina team in terms of Drake specifically. And I think he'll be a key to this game on Saturday. I think he needs to shoot the ball. He needs to play defense extremely well, like he has been for a large part of this season. And I think he's found his role. I think it was a little bit of consistency, which Hubert talked about a lot yesterday, was that this team just needed to find consistency. But I think that consistency comes from playing your natural position and being comfortable playing in the starting lineup again after being kind of moved in and out throughout the year.
Yeah, it's a great point. You've really seen his growth has been great. And at the same time, Duke's freshman from North Carolina, Isaiah Evans, has grown as well. You talked about it right there, a key for this game, but let's talk about that. So we'll start with Matthew this time, and all you guys can give one. But what do you guys think is a key for North Carolina to either keep this game close or win? Is there a stat, player, or just something more generally that you think North Carolina needs to focus on against Duke?
I would say bench contributions.
Mm.
Ian Jackson is really streaky, or has been very streaky at times this year. And I've said this many times before. I know Emma and Caroline are probably going to not like when I say this again, but I really think he serves as a litmus test for this team. When he plays well, this team as a whole has been playing well, and he looks like he's found his role a little bit more. And so I think bench points from him and Seth, and maybe you get a little bit of Cade Tyson in there, probably not much, but I think Ian and Seth off the bench especially will be really crucial in providing another scoring option for UNC, which, as we saw in the first game, is extremely needed.
Emma?
yeah, I think that just turnovers were a big factor in their first game against Duke. I think they had 14 turnovers and 5 were from Elliott, and I think you see with Virginia Tech in that blowout, Elliott had 12 assists and 3 turnovers against Virginia Tech. So I think kind of how Elliott Cadeau handles the ball is kind of going to be a big part of them even staying in the game. I mean, I don't think there's any hope personally. I mean, when you're saying Jalen Withers is the savior of this team, it's bleak, you know. But I think that just being better with the ball is kind of, and specifically with Elliott Cadeau, is going to be a big factor of the game.
I'm gonna go with rebounding. I
Mhm.
feel like that is always a big point of emphasis for Hubert Davis and all of his teams, but I mean, I've watched that team just give up on rebounds and how horrible it's led in terms of the outcome. So I think the biggest thing is for them is just rebounding. Like they're going to miss shots, they're going to be nervous, they're going to mess up. The margin of error is very, very small. So I think one way to kind of overcome that is by getting to the offensive glass, getting defensive rebounds, just all of that.
Yeah. Obviously North Carolina right now, maybe on the bubble, on the bubble definitely. Where do you guys see them right now? What do they need to do to make the tournament? Do you think they'll make the tournament personally? Just kind of where are they at?
Well, from a standpoint of covering an NCAA tournament game for the first time ever for the men's tournament, I hope they make the tournament. But I'm kind of foreseeing their path being one very slim opportunity of beating Duke. That would be enough. And then after that, if that's a loss, hopefully it's keeping it within 10 points or less. That would probably help their resume a little bit. And then in the ACC tournament, I mean, if it's not winning the championship, it's at least playing SMU on a neutral court, which is considered a quad one win. So getting some wins like that under their belt, that's really all that's left. I mean, it's really kind of down to the wire right now.
I think that they have a chance to slip in. Just another element that's kind of been talked about is just Bubba Cunningham, UNC's athletic person. And I think he is fighting for them to be in the tournament. So that's kind of like an under, besides their gameplay, I think they have someone in their corner, which they need considering how low their chances are. But I do think it's fully dependent. I mean, they can lose the Duke game, but they will have to go very far in the ACC tournament and kind of notch some good wins. Otherwise, I think it's unless Bubba does something, I really think that it's looking not great for them.
I'm on the fence. To be honest, I think obviously, as we all know, that a win on Saturday would put them probably firmly in the field. But I think even with a loss, they'd have the chance to play SMU on a neutral court, which shout out Caroline. She told me that it would be a quad one win yesterday. So that's another opportunity for Carolina to kind of prove themselves on especially a neutral court in the sense that, they didn't really do that in Maui because that team looked really, really bad in Maui. But I'd also say that I think the committee will take into account that I know the SEC is good. I do. But some of these teams that they're looking at putting in, like Texas, 6-11 in the conference, Georgia obviously has some big wins, 7-10 in conference play. And I know these teams beat up on each other, but at some point, like, it kind of has to even out, I think. I don't personally want to see 14 SEC teams in the tournament. I don't really think anybody does. I don't know how many would actually make it that far. I think Auburn, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee probably. I think the rest could lose whenever. But I don't think it's looking as bad if Carolina gets another one of those coveted quad one wins, whether that be, keeping it close with Duke, maybe losing by 5-10, something like that on Saturday, and then picking up a win over SMU in the conference tournament and maybe stringing a run together. But I'm on the fence about what it's gonna end up looking like. I know we had 4 or 5 bid stealers last year, so I think a lot of it has to do with conference tournaments and who comes out on top. But I think they'll probably sneak in.
Yeah, it's a great point. I tend to agree with you, Matthew. I think North Carolina's gonna sneak in there at the end. This has been great, but to end it, let's do some score predictions. Emma, I'll start with you this time. What do you think's gonna happen tomorrow?
Again, I think if I'm not one to diss rivalry magic. I think it's a thing. I think it can happen. But I think it's drawing a lot of like 20. I wanted to bring this up, but I feel like the way UNC's headed is drawing like a lot of like 2022 comparisons. And I just think that this Duke team is less valuable than like the 2022 team. And so I think because they've won their last 5 games by 30 plus points on average.
Sounds right.
Yeah, versus this UNC team who's kind of they've had solid wins, but they've been facing kind of the bottom barrel of the ACC. I just think that a lot of people have hoped that they shouldn't. So with that being said, I'm still saying Duke 85, UNC 70, Duke winning by 15.
All right, Matthew.
Yeah, I think Emma's completely right. And to her point about it feeling like 2022, RJ Davis said yesterday that like slow down, that we can talk about that if we make it to the Final Four is what he said. And so I don't think it's like 2022. I think to Emma's point, Carolina has played the bottom of the league. They played State and Miami, who aren't going to make the ACC tournament, and they've beaten up on teams they should beat up on, but I don't see it happening and then keeping it close against Duke. I'm going to go 89-76. Duke wins.
All right, Caroline finishes off.
I agree with everything that's been said. This is not 2022, unfortunately. That would be wonderful as a journalist to cover, but I'm not feeling that kind of magic today. Just overall, this I think about a lot of what Hubert Davis was saying yesterday, that yes, UNC is trending upwards, but Duke is also trending upwards. And right now that Duke team ceiling is a lot higher than this UNC team, and North Carolina might have already hit their ceiling. That might already be the best they're going to play, and I don't know that that's good enough to beat this Duke team. Like Emma said, this is a really really good Duke team. So my score prediction is going to actually be by 12. So I'm going to have Duke 82, UNC 70.
There you go. Nice. Yeah, I think I'm kind of around that ballpark there. Are you guys covering it, or when are you guys covering it, or other writers?
I am.
You do? Awesome.
It's me and Harry Crother. I don't know if you know
Nice.
Harry.
Yeah. Should be a good time.
What about you guys?
We have two of our seniors covering it. Andrew, who was sports editor last year, and Rachel. Yeah, we let them do the away one, and then we take the home one. So, good stuff. Caroline, do you want to just say what's going on the Daily Tar Heel site, socials? Just plug your stuff for any of our listeners to check it out. You guys have been doing some great work.
Yeah, absolutely. So during the game, we'll be live tweeting on DTH Sports on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. And then we will have a gamer posted by the end of the game that will be promoted on all of our socials, Daily Tar Heel, DTH Sports, also on our website. And then after the game, we will have two sidebars kind of breaking down the specifics of the matchup, whether that be like what happened, why did it happen, or what does this mean for a UNC team? I think one really interesting narrative right now is the aftermath for RJ Davis and ending his 5th year and this being his senior day, and all of those things all wrapped up into a little bow. So we will hopefully have something about that. But yeah, overall, just read our work.
All right, great stuff. Well, Caroline, Emma, Matthew, thank you guys so much for coming on. You guys do tremendous stuff, and always fantastic to talk to you guys. So, good job. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, guys.
We'll be right back. All right, so great analysis there from the DTH as always. They provided some interesting insight on the game and some interesting tidbits about how the team has been gelling together, which is interesting, and I think it's true. You've really seen that chemistry there. What are some of your keys to the game, Caleb, and score prediction for you?
Yeah, I mean, unless North Carolina has gotten extremely taller in the last game, I just don't see how they beat Duke on the boards. They actually out-rebounded Duke last game, but it was because Duke just wasn't missing any shots. And at the end of the game, they kind of brought it in. So I've been interested to see what happens. Van Allen Lubin and Jalen Washington taking on Kamal Malawach, and I guess Pat Ngongba. And the other thing they mentioned was Elliot Cadeau. I mean, Sion James kind of manhandled him last game, and Cameron. Obviously, Cadeau's a really good guard. It'd be interesting to see if he bounces back. If he does the same kind of thing he did last game, they're not going to be able to run offense. It's as simple as that. And so I think it'll be interesting. I think there'll definitely be some more juice. They're playing well. They found a new lineup. Powell's a really, really good. He did a really good job last time on Cooper Flag. And so it'll be interesting to see. You want score prediction now or hold off?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I think it'll be close. Closer than all they said. RJ Davis' last game in the Dean Dome. I'll go 86-77 Duke.
Nice. Yeah, for some reason, I have a feeling this is going to be kind of a close game too. Well, close-ish because of a couple things. One, I think we have to watch Tyrese Proctor because he came back against Wake, but he, wasn't fully there all the way in some aspects. He missed a couple layups and shots that he wouldn't normally do, which is normal coming back from an injury. But how much does that affect him against UNC? And then secondly, obviously Malik Brown is out, so likely out. But who fills that gap with Gillison and Ngongba? Do they play better? So those are two guys that I'm watching along with Proctor. I think North Carolina has shot the ball a lot better, which is the recipe to beat Duke. I think Illinois was 0 for a million there, and if they made their threes, they could have actually made it a competitive game. So that's how North Carolina, I think, can do it. I still think the Blue Devils are going to win. I'm going to say something around the same area that you talked about. I'm going to go. Actually, this is kind of similar to what Caroline said, but I'm going to go 83-73. Duke taking a win there to end the regular season, but I would not be surprised if this is actually pretty close. One thing that I will note is we officially learned that Duke associate head coach Jay Lucas will be taking the job over at Miami. Shire's press conference yesterday, he noted that he's super excited for Jay, but it would be unfortunate timing because he's going to leave after the conclusion of the UNC game, so he would not be for Duke for the ACC or NCAA tournaments, which obviously makes sense because of transfer portal opening up in the postseason and recruiting and stuff like that. But it is unfortunate timing.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, congrats, Coach Lucas. Has been one of the best recruiters in the country while he's been here. Duke's defense has been great, so obviously happy for him getting a big job at Miami. I hope he does well. I do think it's pretty ridiculous that the NCAA has the portal open right now to where he has to leave Duke. I don't think he wanted to leave Duke right now, and I think he would say that himself. But for him to have to go recruit during the season for most of the teams in the country is pretty ridiculous in my opinion. But obviously, no ill will. I'm glad he, needs to go do that and recruit. Obviously, Miami's had a rough year. But I think for Duke, it's a big loss. A lot of people don't probably understand. I mean, he's handling the scout for every team Duke's playing. They're going to have to pass that off to somebody. He runs the defense for Duke for the most part. So I think it'll be a pretty big loss and one that Duke really is unfortunate that Duke has to deal with right here down the stretch.
Yeah, agreed. And Shire mentioned that yesterday too, actually, that Lucas wanted to stay. But congrats to him. It'll be a super fun opportunity.
Yeah.
Glad he's getting his chance to be a head coach at an ACC program. So the Duke ACC head coaching tree expands one more.
Yeah.
We got 3.
Yeah, we do. Right now we have 3. Yep.
Right there. All right, so as we mentioned, this is the last week of the regular season, and next week will be the start of the ACC tournament in Charlotte. It's going to be a super, super exciting week, and obviously, I know the ACC hasn't been as strong as it has been top to bottom in years past, but the top of the league is really strong, so should be a fun one over in Charlotte. Let's talk about the tournament and kind of preview who we think is going to win, maybe some sleepers there. With a win Saturday against North Carolina, Duke will lock up the number 1 seed, and then we'll take a double bye in the tournament and will not play until Thursday. So that's really big because Duke will already have a spot in the quarterfinals locked in. It already has a spot in the quarterfinals locked in, but we'll have that 1 seed, and we'll play the quarterfinals Thursday at noon. So I'll start with you, and we'll say who you think is going to be the champion, and then maybe a sleeper or or 2 to watch in the tournament.
Yeah. Champion, I mean, I don't think this is a surprise, is Duke. I think Duke Louisville championship. Duke wins. They're second under Coach Shire. Yeah, I mean, I think, they're pretty universally accepted as the best team in the conference. They've been playing really good basketball. So yeah. And then sleeper, I'm gonna go with Pitt. Pitt has been struggling. They just lost to NC State. But there was a time where they were one of the best teams in the ACC, and they still have the same players. I mean, no one's missing or anything. And so I think if they can kind of get it together, they have some time to regroup here before the tournament. I think they could get hot and win a couple games.
Yeah, I feel like sleeper takes a whole new meaning this year after what NC State did last year. You're right, and I think that's a good pick. I will mention that Duke is going to play a 4 seed, and there's if Duke gets the 1, they would play the 4 seed in the semifinals if they were to win that first game. And there's an interesting race going on for the 4th spot. So currently SMU, North Carolina are tied for 4th at 13-6 in the conference, and Wake is right behind at 12-7. If SMU is to win their game tomorrow at Syracuse, at FSU, that would be they would secure that 4th spot. But if they were to lose, and UNC was also to lose against Duke and Wake Forest wins, there'll be a 3-way tie, and Wake Forest would win that tiebreaker and be 4th. So interesting thing to watch there. I agree with you. I think Duke's going to win the tournament. I don't really see anyone stopping Duke, even though obviously Clemson, beat the Blue Devils at home earlier in February, but I don't think, you get them twice in a row. That'll certainly be on Duke's mind. That Clemson-Louisville semifinal matchup, if it does happen, is going to be really interesting to me because, I feel like Louisville kind of slipped a little bit under the radar. It's important to note that Louisville did beat Clemson in Kentucky, and they handled Clemson pretty well. Their length of their forwards really disrupted the Tigers, so that'll be an interesting 2-3 matchup that I might slightly lean towards Louisville for, but I think that could be a toss-up. Sleepers to watch for me. I'm watching Georgia Tech, who's been a giant killer over the past 2 years. I think the problem for Georgia Tech is maybe getting out of the first round, and then as you get past it, it almost feels like they play better against higher quality opponents. They beat Clemson in overtime in Clemson, and then beat Louisville as well. So you've already beaten 2 of the top 3 teams in the league. Duke handed them a pretty devastating loss over in Atlanta, so that wasn't close. But wherever they end up right now, Georgia Tech is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8th. They're on a 3-game win streak.
Which is
go ahead.
Which is Duke or no?
Which is 8-9, and that is Duke. Yeah, the 1 seed. So maybe not.
I think they're pretty much locked in. They're 10-9. The next team behind them is 8-11. So I think.
Right.
8-9. So probably them against Virginia Tech in the first round.
They could, if Stanford they could go 7 because if Stanford is to lose at Louisville tomorrow and Georgia Tech was to beat Wake, which is a tough matchup, then Georgia Tech would be 7, and I think a much more favorable matchup, which is Louisville. Not much more, but a team that they already beat. So, my other sleeper, I guess I'm cheating with going 2 here is Notre Dame, because Notre Dame is getting healthier now with Burton back, and I don't know if Shrewsbury is out for the season or if he's going to be back, but if he is back, he's a great shooter, and that backcourt is almost as good as anyone in the league. And they are going to be pretty down low. They're going to be playing on.
He's out for the season.
He's out for the season.
Shrewsbury's out for the season.
Okay, so still a team that took Wake down to the wire and beat Stanford. Played well against Clemson and beat Pitt recently, and so regardless of the Shrewsbury loss, they've still been playing well in a team that can make some noise, I think. Yeah, so it should be fun over in Charlotte and a lot of excitement. I always love the ACC tournament. It's one of my favorite events of the year. The back-to-back-to-back games. I'll be over there with Sophie and Dom, and we'll be giving all that coverage to you over from Charlotte. Another thing in the ACC that's going to be coming up before the tournament is awards. So the league will announce its Player of the Year, First Team All-ACC, all that good stuff. Let's go over our ballots. Who do we think is going to be First Team All-ACC, or who do we think deserves it, maybe? I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think we're pretty much on the same page here. Cooper Flagg, I think, is pretty much a lock.
Who's that guy?
I think he'll be unanimous ACC Player of the Year, and Freshman of the Year, Rookie of the Year, whatever they call it. I think Maxime Maynard, another. I mean, they were touting him as a challenger to Flagg when Duke played Stanford. So yeah, Chucky Hepburn has been on an absolute tear for Louisville. Great pickup by Pat Kelsey. I think he'll definitely be on there. The last 2 I think are up for debate. Some combination of Chase Hunter, Ian Shefflin, Con Knipple, Hunter Salas, guys like that. But I'll go with Con and Ian Shefflin. Con is, one of probably the best shooter in the ACC at this point. And Ian is just so good down low for Clemson, and I think Clemson will have someone on the team because they're in the top 3 in the conference, and so just what he does on the boards for Clemson, I think we'll get him on there on the first team. Yeah,
the Clemson side of it is interesting because I feel like Chase had such a good start to the season, and then Ian was battling back spasms throughout, and now he's kind of really coming into his own and playing like the Tigers thought he would at the beginning of the year. So you can't really go wrong there of the Clemson 2. I'm going to go with Chase Hunter just because he's shooting 43% from 3 and averaging 16.4 points a game, and it's just been phenomenal and good efficiency, which, he's developed over his career. It's been better and better. It was a problem for him early, but shooting, 48% from the field, 42% from 3, and 87.6 from the line is pretty good for a volume shooter. So I'll go with Chase, and then the 3 that you mentioned I agree with as well. I won't overlap what you said there. And then I'll also say Con Knipple. I think he's been tremendous over the past 2 games.
Mm-hmm.
He's also, his defense is hustle, just diving on the floor, assisting. His play in the pick and roll I talked about a lot earlier has been tremendous. And so we'll see. I also think, Salas could easily get it, and he would deserve it too, but I'm going to go with Con.
And what do you think? Coach of the Year, Kelsey, Shire?
Yeah, I just think after what you've seen Louisville do the past 2 years, just been in the basement and with Kenny Payne and what Pat Kelsey's done. Revival is really real over there.
Revival, yeah.
The top 3 coaches have all done a phenomenal job with their programs, and so it's hard to pick one. But I think the difference from last year to this year might give it to Pat Kelsey.
No, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, and I just know there's been some debate. So, but yeah, I think Kelsey's definitely deserving. Duke, obviously teams expected Duke to be really good, so it's hard to kind of,
Yeah, and it's almost unfair for Shire to say that, and I don't mean to delegitimize anything that he's done because it's been tremendous getting the perfect portal players and mixing them with the freshman talent and just getting his team to buy in day in and day out. But yeah, I mean, Louisville won like 5 games last year.
Yeah, the Kenny Payne era is way in the rear view at this point.
Yeah, for sure.
And then Defensive Player of the Year, I know there's been some debate there too. Duke men's basketball on X has chimed in. I do think Cooper Flag has a pretty good case for ACC Defensive Player of the Year and maybe National Defensive Player of the Year. The way he impacts the game is unbelievable, but I think it'll be interesting. Him, Chucky Hepburn, Jaden Zachary. Be a good race. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, no, it's funny because obviously that Oglesby tweet yesterday kind of fueled a lot of discussion, and Oglesby mentioned that the reason he did it, he's never seen Jaden or a player level off opposing guards like Jaden Zachary has, and he's right. I mean, Jaden Zachary, as someone who's watched a lot of him play over the years, it's just he's such a tough-nosed defensive guy that that changes how opposing guards have to play Clemson. And I see where he's coming from, but I do think that Cooper's just impact across the board. I think Duke has such a better team defense that it's hard to pick one, for Duke, which might be a little bit harder. Jaden Zachary's like probably by far the best defender on Clemson, along with Dylan Hunter. But still, you have Sion, Malik, and Cooper, and they're all doing so well defensively in common. And it's like, it's almost hard to individualize who's doing all of it. But,
exactly,
Cooper's phenomenal as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thing. Like, and there was a time in the season, I think, before Malik got hurt that like whoever Duke put on the ballot would probably win.
Right.
And they'll only put up one guy, and I think it's pretty obviously Cooper Flag. They're obviously pushing a pretty strong agenda now for Cooper Flag. But I mean, you look at the stats. I mean, he's first in the nation in defensive rating. He's third in the nation in defensive box score plus minus. Like, he really can defend, and so I think it'll be interesting to see if he ends up winning it.
Yeah, I think people are gonna do. And Player of the Year too. And National Player of the Year, probably.
And Rookie of the Year and number 1 draft pick, and he's coming back for 2nd year.
So you can't have those both things at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah. I mean, I think he's definitely, had a great year. I think there's definitely a case to say he's the best freshman Duke's ever had on campus. We'll see what he does in the tournament, but just the way he impacts winning is something we haven't seen out of an 18-year-old in a while here. And so, yeah, good season for Cooper Flag.
For sure. Yeah. And as the postseason starting, a lot of anticipation around what this team can do. Like I mentioned, we'll be bringing you coverage from the ACC Tournament in Charlotte starting on Thursday. We'll have a lot of good preview content, so check out all that at the website at dukechronicle.com. And then we'll be back before the NCAA Tournament to preview the bracket there and break it all down and discuss Duke's region and give our Final Four picks as well. So that should be super fun.
Let me give a quick shout out. As we're recording this, Duke women's basketball is also playing in their ACC Tournament. Tonight, we're recording this on Friday, so tonight, 7:30, they're playing Louisville. Louisville was the only team to beat Duke at home this season.
Right.
So Carroll also has another, great squad. If they beat Louisville, they play Notre Dame. A little bit of chance of revenge there.
If Notre Dame wins as well.
Probably Notre Dame. And so I think, it's another good year. They should be hosting a regional here coming up. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're, around, watch Duke women's before you get your taste of, ACC men's tournament as well.
Yeah, for sure. The women's tournament will, like you mentioned, in all likelihood, be hosted here, and Carol Lawson's done a phenomenal job with that team, and they're really coming together at the right time. Toby Fournier got mentioned as ACC Rookie of the Year. She won earlier this week, so that's big for Lawson's group as they will look to have a great ACC and NCAA tournaments. So all that coverage will also be on our website. So Thank you, and definitely check that out in person and online. It's that time, my friend. March is here. We're ready for it. I hope you guys have a phenomenal week. Enjoy the Duke UNC game if you're in town or able to go to it even, and come over to Charlotte if you have the time and enjoy the game. Enjoy the tournaments as well. So we'll see you guys next week. Thank you so much for listening. For Caleb Dudley, I'm Ranjan Jindal. This has been the Cameron Chronicles.